When Evelyn woke up that morning, she expected it to be just another quiet day in her modest neighborhood, tending to her home as she had done for years. But little did she know, this day would turn her life upside down. As Evelyn was preparing for her morning routine, an unexpected knock on the door shattered the peace. What happened next would push her to the limits of disbelief. A SWAT team stormed her home, guns drawn, convinced they were raiding a criminal hideout. But they were wrong, terribly wrong. And what no one could have foreseen was how deeply this mistake would scar Evelyn, both emotionally and physically. As the truth unraveled, the community was left grappling with a disturbing reality, one that would not only change Evelyn's life but also force the entire town to reflect on their own prejudices. Before we dive into this shocking and emotional story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. If you're ready to join Evelyn on her powerful journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Evelyn Harris's garden, where rows of tomatoes and bell peppers stretched toward the light. At 72, she moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had learned to savor life's quiet moments. Her weathered hands, marked by decades of nurturing both plants and family, gently pulled weeds from around her prized heirloom tomatoes. "Good morning, Miss Evelyn," called out Marcus, the teenage boy from next door, as he wheeled his bike past her white picket fence. "Those tomatoes looking good." Evelyn straightened up slowly, pushing her wide-brimmed gardening hat back from her face. "Morning, sweet boy. Tell your mama I'll have some ready for her pasta sauce next week." This was how most mornings began on Cedar Street, where Evelyn had lived for the past 45 years. The neighborhood had changed around her, but she remained a constant presence, as reliable as the sunrise. Her modest two-story house, with its pale yellow siding and carefully tended flower beds, stood as a testament to decades of love and care. Inside, photographs lined the walls. Her late husband James in his postal worker uniform, their son Greg graduating college, and her 3 grandchildren at various ages. The newest addition showed her youngest granddaughter, Lily, missing her front teeth in a gap-toothed grin at her 7th birthday party last month. Evelyn followed her morning routine with practiced ease. After gardening came breakfast, steel-cut oats with honey and the bananas she kept perfectly ripened on her windowsill. As she ate at her kitchen table, she filled out the daily crossword puzzle, a habit she'd maintained since James passed 5 years ago. For letters for morning moisture, she muttered to herself, tapping her pencil against her chin. "Do, of course." The phone rang, its cheerful tone echoing through the house. It was Greg, calling for their daily morning check-in. "Morning, Mama." His warm voice came through the speaker. "How are you doing today?" "Just fine, baby. Already been out in the garden. Those tomato plants you helped me stake last weekend are coming along beautifully." "That's great, Mama. Listen, the kids have been asking to come over this weekend. Lily wants to help you bake those chocolate chip cookies you always make." Evelyn's face lit up. "You know, I never turn down time with my grandbabies. Tell them to come over Saturday afternoon. I'll make sure to have everything ready." After hanging up, Evelyn hummed to herself as she washed her breakfast dishes. Through her kitchen window, she could see Mrs. Patterson from across the street walking her poodle, waving as she passed. This was the rhythm of life on Cedar Street, predictable, peaceful, secure. What Evelyn couldn't see was how quickly that peace was about to shatter. Across town at the Metropolitan Police Department's SWAT headquarters, the atmosphere crackled with tension. Captain David Marshall stood before a room full of officers, pointing to surveillance photos projected on the wall behind him. "Listen up, people. At 0300 hours this morning, a semi-truck carrying a shipment of automatic weapons was hijacked on Interstate 95. Intel suggests the weapons are headed for distribution in the city. Even worse, we've received reports that the crew is also moving a significant amount of narcotics." Officer Sarah Chin raised her hand. "Do we have any leads on their location?" Marshall clicked to the next slide, showing a map of the city. "We've managed to track one of their phones. The signal's been bouncing around this general area." He circled the neighborhood with his laser pointer. Officer James Rodriguez leaned forward, studying the map. "Cedar Street District? That's mostly residential." "Exactly," Marshall continued. "They're likely hoping to lay low in a quiet area while they organize distribution." We've got pressure from above to move fast on this one. These weapons cannot hit the streets. The briefing room hummed with nervous energy as officers reviewed the limited information before them. The Find My Phone app tracking had provided only intermittent pings, creating a rough circle around several residential blocks. Lieutenant Mike Brooks, a 20-year veteran of the force, studied the data on his tablet with a frown. This intel seems pretty thin, Captain. The phone tracking isn't exactly precise. I know it's not ideal, Marshall admitted, but we don't have the luxury of time. Every hour those weapons remain out there is another hour they could end up in the wrong hands. Officer Tom Wilson, who had been quietly studying the map, spoke up. That's the old Cedar Street area, isn't it? Been having some issues there lately. The room shifted uncomfortably as Wilson continued, his voice carrying an edge that made some officers glance away. I mean, let's be realistic here. It's not exactly the safest neighborhood anymore, if you know what I mean. Perfect place for criminals to blend in. Lieutenant Brooks's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Wilson pressed on. I did a patrol there last month. Lots of suspicious activity. These people dashed. These people are citizens we're sworn to protect. Brooks cut in sharply. Let's stick to the facts of this case. But Wilson's words had already done their damage, planting seeds of assumption in the minds of the tactical team. Officer Chin pulled up property records for the area on her tablet, focusing on one particular house that fell right in the center of the phone's last ping. Captain, there's a property here that might be worth checking out. Lieutenant Brooks spoke up again. Captain, I think we need more surveillance before we move in. A few hours of observation could dash. We don't have a few hours, Marshall interrupted. The chief wants these weapons off the street now. If we wait, we risk losing them entirely. He paused, looking around the room. I understand the concerns, but sometimes we have to act on limited intelligence. The safety of this city has to come first. Brooks looked like he wanted to argue further, but years of experience had taught him when a decision was already made. He watched as the team began gearing up, their black tactical equipment creating dark shadows in the fluorescent-lit room. Full tactical response, Marshall announced. We go in hard and fast. If these are our suspects, we can't give them any chance to dispose of evidence or, worse, use those weapons. As the SWAT team prepared for the raid, none of them thought too deeply about the elderly woman whose name appeared on the property records. Their minds were filled with scenarios of armed criminals and hidden weapons, their judgment clouded by assumptions about the neighborhood and its residents. Lieutenant Brooks lingered behind as the team filed out to gear up. He stood before the map, staring at the small that represented 1247 Cedar Street. Something felt off about this whole operation, but he couldn't put his finger on exactly what. After 20 years on the force, he'd learned to trust his instincts. Captain, he tried one last time. Maybe we should at least do a drive-by first, get eyes on the house. Marshall was already halfway out the door. No time, Mike. Sometimes you have to trust your gut in this job. The intel might not be perfect, but that neighborhood... Well, Wilson's not entirely wrong about the statistics. Brooks watched his superior officer leave, a heavy feeling settling in his stomach. He thought about arguing further, but knew it would be futile. The machinery of the raid was already in motion, fueled by a toxic mixture of pressure from above, limited intelligence, and unspoken biases. As he finally moved to join his team, Brooks couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to make a terrible mistake. But like so many times before, the momentum of the moment, the urgent calls from superiors, the adrenaline of an imminent raid, the unquestioned assumptions about certain neighborhoods and the people who live there would overcome any last-minute doubts. Back on Cedar Street, Evelyn Harris was finishing up her morning routine, completely unaware that her peaceful world was about to be turned upside down. She had just changed out of her gardening clothes and was planning to head to the senior center for her weekly bridge game with friends. Looking in her bedroom mirror, she adjusted her silver hair and smiled at her reflection. Not bad for 72, she murmured to herself, thinking of how proud James would be of how well she'd maintained their home and garden since his passing. The morning sun continued to shine through her windows, casting warm patches of light across her carefully maintained home. The clock on her bedside table read 9:47 a.m. In less than 24 hours, everything about her peaceful life would change forever. As she went about her morning, the SWAT team was already mobilizing. Officers checked their weapons and reviewed the hasty tactical plan. Their heavy boots echoed through the police station's corridors as they moved with purpose, their minds already shifting into raid mode. None of them knew that their actions, born from a mixture of urgency, incomplete information, and unchallenged biases, would soon become a stark lesson in the consequences of rushed judgment and systemic prejudice. The peace of Cedar Street was about to be shattered, and Evelyn Harris's life would never be the same. The machinery of law enforcement was now in unstoppable motion, rolling forward with the terrible momentum of unchecked authority and unconscious bias. In the quiet before the storm, Evelyn Harris picked up her purse, checked her lipstick one last time, and headed for her front door, ready for another ordinary day in what had always been her peaceful corner of the world. She had no way of knowing that tomorrow morning, instead of tending to her beloved garden, she would become an unwitting symbol of everything wrong with a system that too often acted first and asked questions later, if it asked them at all. Dawn hadn't yet broken over Cedar Street when the SWAT vehicles rolled silently into position, their lights off and engines humming quietly. The morning air was crisp, and wisps of fog clung to the ground, giving the scene an almost surreal quality. Birds had just begun their morning songs, unaware of the chaos about to unfold. Inside 1247 Cedar Street, Evelyn Harris was following her usual morning routine. She'd always been an early riser, a habit formed over decades of married life with James, who had to be at the post office before sunrise. Even now, years after his passing, she maintained that schedule. Steam filled her bathroom as she stepped out of the shower, wrapping herself in her favorite pale blue bathrobe, a Christmas gift from her grandchildren. She secured her hair in a bonnet, humming softly to herself as she wiped condensation from the mirror. "Lord, these old bones aren't what they used to be," she murmured, rubbing her shoulder where the arthritis sometimes flared up in the morning dampness. Outside, Captain Marshall was giving last-minute instructions to his team through their radio headsets. "Remember, intel suggests multiple armed suspects. We go in fast and hard. Secure any civilians quickly and safely." Lieutenant Brooks adjusted his tactical vest, that nagging feeling of wrongness still sitting heavy in his stomach. "Captain, maybe we should dash." His words were cut off by Marshall's sharp command, "Go, go, go." The first sound Evelyn heard was like thunder, the battering ram hitting her front door with enough force to shake the entire house. The bathroom mirror rattled against the wall, and her hand froze midway through applying her face cream. "Police! Everyone on the ground! Come out with your hands up!" The shouts were deafening, echoing through her home like a nightmare. Evelyn's heart leaped into her throat, and her legs began to tremble. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. "I said come out now. Hands where we can see them." Moving on instinct alone, Evelyn opened the bathroom door. The sight that greeted her seemed impossible. Black-clad figures with rifles swept through her home, laser sights dancing across her walls like angry red fireflies. The morning light streaming through her windows caught on their tactical gear, creating frightening shadows that seemed to move with lives of their own. "Oh, Lord Jesus," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of boots thundering through her house. "Contact," an officer shouted, spotting her in the hallway. "Don't move. Hands up." Evelyn's arms rose slowly, trembling violently. Her knees felt weak, and she was suddenly very aware of being in just her bathrobe and bonnet. "Please," she managed to say. "Please, I live here, dash. On the ground. Now." Two officers approached her with rifles raised. In her confusion and terror, Evelyn's legs finally gave out, and she sank to her knees. Rough hands grabbed her shoulders, pushing her face down onto the hardwood floor she'd polished just yesterday. Securing the subject, one officer called out as cold handcuffs bit into her wrists. From her position on the floor, Evelyn could only watch in horror as her peaceful home was torn apart. Officers moved through rooms with military precision, but their search was anything but precise. The sound of destruction echoed through the house, drawers being yanked open, furniture being moved, closet doors being kicked in. In the kitchen, Officer Chin pulled open Evelyn's recipe drawer so forcefully that the entire thing came out, scattering decades of handwritten recipe cards across the floor. The yellowed paper with James's mother's cornbread recipe, the one he'd loved so much, floated down to land in a puddle of spilled morning coffee. "Clear," Chin called out, moving to the next drawer. Upstairs, Officer Wilson was ransacking Evelyn's bedroom. He pulled shirts and dresses from her closet, tossing them aside as he searched for hidden compartments. A framed photo of James in his postal uniform crashed to the floor, glass shattering. "Please," Evelyn called out, her voice stronger now despite her terror. "Please stop. You're destroying everything." In the garage, the battering ram made short work of a locked storage cabinet. Christmas decorations spilled out. The artificial trees she and James had bought their first year in the house, ornaments their children had made in school, strings of lights carefully wound and stored away each year. "Nothing here," came the call. Moving to the next sector, Lieutenant Brooks, who had entered behind the main team, was the first to notice something wasn't right. The house didn't match their intel at all. The family photos on the walls, the well-worn Bible on the coffee table, the garden tools neatly arranged by the back door. This wasn't a criminal hideout. "Call up to records," he barked into his radio. "I need an immediate verification on this address." But the search continued. In the living room, officers overturned Evelyn's sofa, sending her knitting basket flying. Balls of yarn rolled across the floor like colorful tumbleweeds. The sweater she'd been making for Lily's birthday lay half-finished and trampled under heavy boots. Through it all, Evelyn remained on the floor, tears streaming down her face. She could hear the sounds of her life being torn apart. The crack of wood as someone forced open her hope chest, the crash of dishes as they searched her china cabinet, the thud of books being swept off shelves. "My God," she prayed quietly, "please protect me." Officer Rodriguez was searching the dining room when he came across a stack of birthday cards on the sideboard. They were ready to be mailed out. One to her grandson Tommy for his 10th birthday, another to her niece Sarah, who was expecting her first baby. The careful handwriting on the envelopes made him pause. "Lieutenant," he called out, his voice uncertain. "You need to see this." Brooks was already on his way over, his face grim. The radio crackled with a response from records. "Confirm address, 1247 Cedar Street. Owner Evelyn Harris. Age 72. No criminal record. Property owned free and clear for 45 years. No recent police contact." The lieutenant's face hardened as he keyed his radio. "Captain, we need to stop. Now." Marshall, who had been coordinating from outside, rushed in. The scene that greeted him made his stomach turn. An elderly black woman in a bathrobe lay handcuffed on the floor, surrounded by the ruins of what had clearly been a well-kept home. His officers stood around uncertainly, their earlier bravado replaced by growing horror at what they'd done. "Stand down," Marshall ordered, his voice tight. "Everyone out. Now." Brooks was already moving to Evelyn, kneeling beside her with his keys out to remove the handcuffs. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. There's been a terrible mistake." Evelyn's wrists were red where the cuffs had bit into them. She sat up slowly, pulling her robe tight around herself, trying to maintain what dignity she could. Her eyes moved around her destroyed home, taking in the devastation. The morning sun now streamed fully through her windows, illuminating the chaos. Paper and debris littered every surface. Her furniture lay scattered and broken. The smell of her spilled coffee mingled with the dusty air stirred up by the search. Through her broken front door, she could see neighbors gathering on the street, drawn by the commotion. Captain Marshall stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mrs. Harris, I'm Captain David Marshall. I need to explain dash." "No," Evelyn interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. "No, you don't need to explain anything right now." She struggled to her feet, refusing Brooks's offered hand. "What you need to do is leave my home." The officers began to file out, their boots crunching on broken glass and splintered wood. Some couldn't meet her eyes. Others stared too long, their faces a mixture of shame and defensive pride. Wilson paused in the doorway. "Ma'am, we were acting on intelligence dash." "Intelligence?" Evelyn's laugh was bitter. "Look around you, young man. What kind of intelligence led you to do this to an old woman's home? What kind of intelligence had you breaking down my door before sunrise? Marshall tried again. Mrs. Harris, we had information about dangerous criminals dash. Do I look dangerous to you, Captain? Evelyn gestured to herself, an elderly woman in a bathrobe and bonnet, standing amid the wreckage of her home. Or did you not bother to look at all before you came charging in here? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications that made several officers shift uncomfortably. Brooks, still standing nearby, saw the truth of it written clearly on his colleagues' faces. They hadn't looked, not really. They'd seen what they expected to see, what their biases had prepared them to see. Through the broken door, Evelyn could hear her neighbors' voices growing louder, angry. Mrs. Patterson was on her phone, presumably calling the media. Marcus's mother was trying to hold him back as he shouted at the officers leaving the house. The morning birds had stopped singing. We'll have someone come to secure your door, Marshall offered weakly. And of course, the department will pay for any damages dash. Any damages? Evelyn's voice cracked as she bent to pick up the shattered picture of James. Can you pay for this? Can you repair 45 years of memories? Can you give me back the feeling of being safe in my own home? The questions remained unanswered as the last officers filed out. The SWAT team that had arrived with such forceful purpose now retreated in shameful disorder. Their boots left muddy tracks across Evelyn's floor, adding one final indignity to the morning's devastation. Standing in her ruined living room, Evelyn Harris felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, yes, but something else was growing stronger, determination. She looked around at her destroyed home, at the scattered remnants of her peaceful life, and made a decision. This isn't right, she whispered to James's broken picture. And it isn't over. Outside, the sun had fully risen on Cedar Street. Neighbors gathered in clusters, taking pictures with their phones, comforting each other, and watching with hard eyes as the SWAT team packed up their gear. The morning that had started with such violence was giving way to something else. The slow-burning anger of a community that had seen this story too many times before. Lieutenant Brooks was the last to leave. He paused at what remained of Evelyn's door, looking back at the proud woman standing amid the chaos his team had created. Mrs. Harris, he said softly, I truly am sorry. Evelyn met his eyes steadily. Being sorry isn't enough, Lieutenant. Not anymore. As the SWAT vehicles pulled away, leaving tire marks on her carefully tended lawn, Evelyn Harris stood in her doorway. Her neighbors were already moving toward her house, bringing brooms and trash bags, ready to help clean up the physical damage. But they all knew some things couldn't be swept away so easily. The morning peace of Cedar Street had been shattered, replaced by something harder and more determined. In the coming days, weeks, and months, the ripples from this morning would spread far beyond this quiet neighborhood. But for now, Evelyn Harris simply stood in her broken doorway, holding the shattered picture of her late husband, and let the tears fall freely down her face. The birds, gradually returning to their morning songs, were the only witnesses to her quiet promise. This will not stand, James. This will not stand. As the last police vehicle pulled away from Cedar Street, the morning sun illuminated the full extent of the devastation left behind. Evelyn Harris stood motionless on her front porch, still clutching James's broken picture frame, the glass fragments catching the light like fallen stars. Her bathrobe, now dirty from being forced to the ground, hung loosely around her trembling frame. Mrs. Patterson approached cautiously, her phone still recording. Evelyn, honey, let me call your son. Evelyn barely heard her. Her eyes were fixed on her garden, where heavy boots had trampled her beloved tomato plants. The stake she and Greg had carefully placed last weekend lay broken and scattered. Somehow, this small destruction broke something loose inside her. My garden, she whispered, her voice cracking. James loved that garden. Her neighbors had gathered on her lawn, their faces a mixture of anger and concern. Marcus's mother, Sandra, was already on her phone calling Greg. Others were taking pictures of the damage, documenting everything. But Evelyn barely registered their presence. Inside her mind, the morning's events played on an endless loop, the thunderous crash of her door being broken down, the terrifying sight of armed men flooding into her home, the cold bite of handcuffs on her wrists. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. I should clean up, she muttered, turning toward her broken door. But as she stepped into her home, the sight of the destruction stopped her cold. Her neat, orderly world had been transformed into chaos. Family photos lay scattered and broken across the floor. The coffee table where she did her morning crossword puzzles was overturned. Her knitting, the sweater she'd been making for Lily, lay trampled and dirty. The sound of tires screeching on pavement made her jump violently. It was just a passing car, but her heart raced as if the SWAT team was returning. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. "Mama? Mama?" Greg's voice cut through her daze. He must have broken every speed limit to get there so quickly. She turned to see him running up her front walk, his face twisted with worry and anger. "Oh, Mama," he breathed, taking in her appearance, the bathrobe, the bonnet askew on her head, the lost look in her eyes. "What did they do to you?" The sight of her son, her baby boy who had grown into such a strong man, finally broke the dam. Evelyn's legs gave out, and Greg caught her as she collapsed, sobbing. "They just came in, baby," she cried into his shoulder. "They just came in like I was nothing. Like I was nobody." Greg held his mother tightly, his own tears falling into her silver hair. Over her shoulder, he surveyed the destruction of his childhood home. The place where he'd learned to walk, where he'd done his homework, where his own children now came to visit their grandmother. All of it violated in the name of law enforcement. "It's okay, Mama," he soothed, but they both knew it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. The next few days passed in a blur of activity around Evelyn, but she moved through it like a ghost. Neighbors and church members brought food she couldn't eat. Friends called with sympathy she couldn't process. Her grandchildren were kept away, Greg deciding they shouldn't see their grandmother in this state. Night brought its own terrors. Every creak of the house, every distant siren sent her heart racing. The temporary plywood covering her broken door seemed to mock her with its presence. Even after the locksmith installed new locks, she checked them compulsively 3 or 4 times before trying to sleep. But sleep rarely came. When it did, it was filled with nightmares. Masked men breaking down her door, rough hands forcing her to the ground, the sound of her home being torn apart. She would wake gasping, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, reaching instinctively for James's side of the bed only to find it empty. During the day, she jumped at every unexpected sound. The slam of a car door sent her into panic. The sight of a police car patrolling the neighborhood made her hands shake so badly she had to sit down. Her garden, once her pride and joy, lay untended. She couldn't bring herself to step outside, couldn't bear to see the destruction or feel exposed in her own yard. The tomato plants withered in the summer heat, their stems broken, their fruit rotting on the vine. Greg visited every day, bringing groceries she didn't eat and comfort she couldn't accept. He found her one morning obsessively cleaning already spotless surfaces, trying to erase the muddy boot prints that were no longer there. "Mama," he said gently, taking the cleaning cloth from her raw hands. "You need to rest." "I can't rest," she replied, her voice distant. "They might come back. They might." Her words trailed off as tears began falling again. Greg pulled her into a hug, feeling how thin she'd become in just a few days. "They're not coming back, Mama, but we're going to make them answer for this." That afternoon, Greg brought someone else to the house. Patricia Reynolds, a civil rights attorney known for taking on cases of police misconduct. She sat with Evelyn at the kitchen table, listening intently as Greg recounted what had happened. Evelyn stayed quiet, staring at the drawer where her recipe cards had been scattered. She tried to organize them, but some were stained beyond reading, and others had been trampled beyond repair. James's mother's cornbread recipe was lost forever. "Mrs. Harris," Patricia said gently, "what happened to you was wrong. Not just illegal, deeply, fundamentally wrong. We can file a civil rights lawsuit against the police department." Evelyn's hands trembled as she clutched her untouched tea. "Will that make them think twice before doing this to someone else?" "It can help," Patricia assured her. "But more than that, it can force them to acknowledge their mistakes, their biases. Make them face what they did to you." The word biases hung in the air. Everyone in the room knew why Evelyn's house had been targeted. It wasn't just the faulty phone tracking or bad intelligence. It was assumptions made about her neighborhood, about her race, about who deserved the benefit of the doubt and who didn't. They would never have done this in River Heights, Greg said bitterly, naming an affluent, predominantly white neighborhood across town. They would have watched the house first, verified their intelligence, knocked on the door like civilized people. Patricia nodded, making notes in her legal pad. The racial component will be a key part of our case. This isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern. As they discussed legal strategies, the story of the raid was spreading beyond Cedar Street. Local news vans had been parked on the street for days, their cameras capturing the plywood door, the trampled garden, the neighbors standing guard on their porches. Community activists began organizing protests outside the police station. Social media lit up with Evelyn's story, her experience resonating with countless others who had faced similar treatment. The image of a 72-year-old grandmother in her bathrobe being handcuffed in her own home became a powerful symbol of law enforcement overreach and racial bias. Reverend Daniel Johnson from Evelyn's church spoke to reporters gathered outside the police station. This is not just about one raid or one mistake. This is about a system that sees black homes, black neighborhoods, black people as inherently suspicious. Mrs. Harris has been a pillar of this community for 45 years. She deserved better. We all deserve better. The police department issued a formal apology, promising an internal investigation. But their carefully worded statement spoke of procedural errors and intelligence failures, avoiding any mention of the racial assumptions that had led them to target Evelyn's home. Captain Marshall held a press conference, looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform. "We regret any distress caused to Mrs. Harris," he said stiffly. "The department is reviewing our procedures for verifying intelligence before tactical operations." Lieutenant Brooks watched the conference from the back of the room, his face grim. He had already given a detailed statement to Internal Affairs about his concerns before the raid and his observations about how racial bias had influenced the decision-making process. His honesty had made him unpopular with some colleagues, but he couldn't stay silent. Back on Cedar Street, the community continued to rally around Evelyn. Neighbors took turns staying with her at night, so she wouldn't be alone. The local hardware store donated materials to repair her door properly. A group of teenage boys, led by Marcus, worked to restore her garden, carefully replanting what could be saved. But the woman who had once been the heart of the neighborhood was changed. The Evelyn who had shared recipes and gardening tips, who had hosted bridge games and baked cookies for the neighborhood children, seemed to have retreated deep inside herself. One evening, as Greg was helping her sort through broken photos and keepsakes, Evelyn found herself staring at a picture of James in his postal uniform. "You know what he always said about wearing that uniform?" she asked quietly. "He said it made him proud because it meant he was serving his community. He believed in service, in doing right by people." She touched the photo gently. "What would he think of how they served our community that morning?" Greg put down the box he was holding and sat beside his mother. "He'd be proud of you, Mama. Proud that you're standing up, that you're fighting back." Evelyn nodded slowly, her fingers still tracing James's face in the photograph. "Sometimes I think about other people this has happened to. Other mothers, grandmothers. People who maybe didn't have family to help them, or lawyers to fight for them." She straightened her shoulders slightly. "Maybe that's why this happened to me. Maybe I'm supposed to speak up for them too." As the sun set on another day in the aftermath of the raid, Evelyn sat on her porch for the first time since that morning. Her teacup trembled slightly in her hands when a car drove by, but she forced herself to stay seated. In her garden, the newly planted tomatoes stood straight and strong, their stakes firmly in place. Patricia Reynolds was building a strong case, documenting every aspect of the raid and its aftermath. The physical damage to the house, the emotional trauma, the racial profiling. It was all coming together into a powerful indictment of police practices. But for Evelyn, sitting on her porch watching the sunset, this was about more than money or legal victories. It was about reclaiming her sense of safety, her dignity, her place in the world. It was about ensuring that no other grandmother would have to experience what she had experienced. As darkness fell on Cedar Street, Evelyn finally rose to go inside. Her hands shook as she checked the locks. Once, twice, 3 times. But as she passed the wall of family photos, now partially repaired and rehung, she paused. "We're going to make this right, James," she whispered to her husband's picture. "Not just for me. For everyone they think doesn't deserve better." The night settled over the neighborhood. But this time, Evelyn Harris wasn't alone in her vigil. Her community stood with her, their lights burning in solidarity, their hearts beating with shared purpose. The battle for justice was just beginning, and Cedar Street was ready for the fight. The morning of the trial dawned cool and clear, the kind of autumn day that would normally find Evelyn tending to her late-season vegetables. Instead, she sat in the courthouse's marble hallway, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, wearing the navy blue suit she'd bought specially for this day. "You ready, Mama?" Greg asked softly, sitting beside her. Evelyn smoothed her skirt, a gesture more nervous than practical. "Ready as I'll ever be, baby." James always said the truth needs a voice. Today, I'm going to be that voice. Patricia Reynolds approached, her heels clicking purposefully on the marble floor. "Mrs. Harris, they're ready for us?" The attorney's confidence was reassuring, but Evelyn could see the weight of responsibility in her eyes. The courtroom was larger than Evelyn had expected, its high ceilings and wood paneling lending an air of gravity to the proceedings. As she made her way to her seat, she noticed Lieutenant Brooks sitting in the back row, out of uniform. Their eyes met briefly, and he nodded slightly. The proceedings began with opening statements. Patricia stood before the jury, her voice clear and measured. "This case is about more than a mistaken address or faulty technology. It's about the assumptions and biases that led heavily armed officers to break down an elderly grandmother's door before sunrise, without proper investigation, without proper cause, and without basic human dignity." The police department's attorney, Richard Bennett, presented their defense with rehearsed precision. The officers were acting on the best information available at the time. In a city plagued by gun violence, quick action is sometimes necessary to prevent weapons from reaching our streets. But it was Evelyn's testimony that transformed the clinical proceedings into something more profound. As she took the stand, she felt James's presence strongly, giving her strength. "Please state your name for the record," the court clerk requested. "Evelyn Marie Harris." "Mrs. Harris," Patricia began gently, "can you tell us about the morning of July 15th? Evelyn's voice trembled slightly, but grew stronger as she spoke. "I was getting ready for my day, just like I have for the past 45 years in that house. I'd already showered and was in my robe when I heard this terrible crash. It sounded like the world was ending." She described the terror of those moments. The shouting, the guns pointed at her, the humiliation of being forced to the ground in her own home. As she spoke, several jurors eyed her with concern. "They didn't even let me cover myself properly," she said, her dignity evident even in recounting the indignity. "I kept asking them to explain, but nobody would listen. They treated me like I wasn't even human." During cross-examination, Bennett tried to maintain the department's narrative. "Mrs. Harris, you understand the officers were searching for dangerous criminals?" "Mr. Bennett," Evelyn replied, her voice steady now, "what I understand is that those officers saw exactly what they expected to see in my neighborhood, what they wanted to see. They saw a black neighborhood and decided that made sense for criminals. They didn't see me, my home, my life. They didn't see 45 years of memories. They didn't see a grandmother who's never had so much as a parking ticket." The testimony of police officials revealed the cracks in their defense. Captain Marshall struggled to explain why standard surveillance protocols weren't followed. Time was of the essence, he insisted, shifting uncomfortably in the witness chair. Was time so essential that you couldn't spare 30 minutes to verify who lived in the house? Patricia pressed. To perhaps notice the well-maintained garden? The lack of suspicious activity? Or did the location make you assume you already knew everything you needed to know? Lieutenant Brooks's testimony proved particularly damaging to the department's case. "I expressed concerns about the lack of proper intelligence," he stated firmly. "But certain assumptions were made about the neighborhood that seemed to override standard procedures." "What kind of assumptions, Lieutenant?" Patricia asked. "Objection," Calls for speculation. Bennett interrupted. Overruled. Judge Martinez ruled. The witness may answer. Brooks looked directly at Evelyn as he responded. Assumptions based on race and neighborhood demographics. The kind of assumptions that would never have led to such aggressive action in other parts of the city. The technological evidence further undermined the department's defense. Expert testimony revealed that the phone tracking data had been imprecise, covering a radius of several blocks. The decision to target Evelyn's house specifically appeared increasingly arbitrary. Your Honor, Patricia addressed the court. I'd like to enter into evidence the department's raid statistics for the past 5 years. The numbers told their own story, a pattern of aggressive tactics disproportionately used in minority neighborhoods. As the trial progressed, the community's support became increasingly visible. Cedar Street residents packed the courtroom gallery. Local civil rights organizations held daily vigils outside the courthouse. News cameras captured every development, and social media buzzed with updates and commentary. During a lunch recess, Evelyn sat quietly in a conference room, picking at a sandwich Greg had brought her. You know what I keep thinking about? She said suddenly. Mrs. Johnson down the street. Remember when the same thing happened to her family 10 years ago? Greg nodded. They didn't fight it like you are, Mama. They didn't have the strength left to fight. But maybe if someone had fought back then, what happened to me wouldn't have happened at all. The defense's case began to crumble under the weight of evidence and testimony. Officer Wilson's attempt to justify the raid's aggression only highlighted the department's biases. The neighborhood's crime statistics suggested a high probability of criminal activity, he testified. And what exactly about Mrs. Harris's property suggested criminal activities? Patricia countered. The flower beds? The rocking chair on the porch? The family photos visible through the windows? Wilson's silence spoke volumes. The closing arguments crystallized the case's significance. Patricia stood before the jury, her voice passionate but controlled. This case isn't just about one morning of terror in one grandmother's life. It's about the systematic devaluation of Black lives and Black dignity. It's about the assumption that some citizens deserve less care, less respect, less consideration before their doors are broken down and their lives are upended. Bennett's closing argument emphasized procedure and protocol, but his words seemed hollow in the face of Evelyn's testimony and the overwhelming evidence of bias. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours. When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. In the matter of Harris versus the Metropolitan Police Department, we find in favor of the plaintiff. We award damages in the amount of $4 million. The gallery erupted in cheers, but Evelyn sat quietly, tears streaming down her face. Greg wrapped his arms around her shoulders. We did it, Mama, he whispered. We did it, baby, she replied softly. We did it for everybody who couldn't. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Patricia and Evelyn. Mrs. Harris, what does this verdict mean to you? A young reporter asked. Evelyn straightened her shoulders, speaking with the quiet strength that had carried her through the trial. This verdict isn't about money. It's about accountability. It's about saying that what happened to me wasn't right, and it isn't right when it happens to anyone else. Maybe now, before they break down another door, they'll remember this day. They'll remember that behind that door might be someone's grandmother, someone's mother, someone's family. The verdict sparked immediate changes. The police department announced comprehensive reforms in raid protocols and bias training. Community oversight committees were established. Lieutenant Brooks was promoted to lead a new division focused on community relations and accountability. But for Evelyn, the most meaningful change came weeks later, when she finally felt strong enough to replant her garden. As she knelt in the soil, Greg working beside her, she heard the sound of children playing on the street again, something that had been rare since the raid. The neighborhood's coming back to life, Greg observed, staking a tomato plant. Evelyn smiled, really smiled for the first time in months. Sometimes you have to fight for your peace, she said, patting the earth around a pepper plant. Sometimes you have to show them that your dignity matters, your home matters, your life matters. She looked up at her house, the new door strong and secure, the repaired windows gleaming in the sunlight. The scars of that terrible morning would always be there, but they had become marks of triumph rather than trauma. That evening, As the sun set over Cedar Street, Evelyn sat on her porch, a cup of tea in her hands. Mrs. Patterson waved as she walked her poodle. Marcus rode by on his bike, calling out a cheerful greeting. The daily rhythms of the neighborhood were returning, but something fundamental had changed. The community stood taller now, knowing they had fought and won. They had shown that justice was possible, that their voices mattered, that their lives mattered. Evelyn touched the wedding ring she still wore, thinking of James. "We did it, honey," she whispered. "We showed them that even a grandmother can change the world, one garden, one courtroom, one truth at a time." The stars began to appear in the darkening sky. And for the first time since that terrible morning, Evelyn didn't feel the need to check her locks 3 times before bed. She had reclaimed not just her sense of security, but her dignity and her voice. And in doing so, she had helped pave the way for others to do the same. As she finally rose to go inside, she paused to look at her newly replanted garden. The young plants stood straight and strong, reaching toward tomorrow's sun. Like her community, like her spirit, they would grow back stronger than before. The story of Cedar Street and Evelyn Harris would be remembered not just as a tale of injustice, but as a testament to the power of standing up, speaking out, and fighting for change. The porch light cast a warm glow on her garden as she turned to go inside, secure in the knowledge that her fight had meant something, had changed something. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles for justice, but tonight on Cedar Street, peace had finally returned. Not the false peace of silence and submission, but the true peace that comes from knowing you've stood up for what's right, no matter the cost. In the months following the trial, Cedar Street buzzed with the sounds of construction. The rhythmic pounding of hammers and whirring of power tools became a symphony of renewal as workers restored Evelyn's home. She stood in her garden, watching as her settlement money transformed the physical scars of that terrible morning into something new, something stronger. "Mrs. Harris," called Juan, the lead contractor, "we've got those custom security windows you wanted installed. Want to come take a look?" Evelyn nodded, following him inside. The new windows gleamed in the morning light, their reinforced glass a subtle reminder of how much had changed. She'd chosen them not just for protection, but as a statement. She wouldn't live in fear, but she wouldn't be vulnerable either. "They're perfect," she said, running her hand along the smooth frame. "And the security system? Top of the line, ma'am. Cameras, motion sensors, direct link to emergency services. Nobody's going to catch you off guard again." As Juan returned to work, Evelyn wandered through her partially renovated home. The new hardwood floors shone where muddy boot prints had once marred the surface. Fresh paint covered the walls where aggressive searches had left scuffs and scratches. But some things couldn't be replaced. James's mother's cornbread recipe, the children's handmade Christmas ornaments, the small marks on the doorframe where she'd measured Greg's height growing up. "Mama," Greg's voice called from the front door. "You ready for your appointment?" Evelyn checked her watch. Almost time for her therapy session with Dr. Martinez. She'd resisted at first, insisting she was too old for all that talking business. But Greg had gently persisted. "The strongest thing you can do is ask for help, Mama," he'd said. "You taught me that." In Dr. Martinez's warm office, Evelyn settled into what had become her usual chair. The therapist's kind eyes watched as she arranged herself, smoothing her skirt with slightly trembling hands. "How are the nightmares, Evelyn?" Dr. Martinez asked gently. "Better," Evelyn admitted. "I still wake up sometimes, hearing those boots on my floor. But now I can remind myself that it's over, that we won. And the renovations? How's it feeling to see your home changing?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment, considering. "It's like putting on a new dress over an old scar. The dress is beautiful, but you know what's underneath. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe we need our scars to remind us what we've survived." After her session, Evelyn met with Patricia Reynolds at a small cafe near the courthouse. The lawyer had become more than just her legal representative. She'd become a friend and ally in the fight for change. "I've been thinking," Evelyn said, stirring her tea. $4 million is a lot of money." Patricia nodded, waiting. "Too much for just one old lady's garden and some broken furniture." Evelyn pulled out a notebook filled with her neat handwriting. "I've made a list." The list detailed organizations and causes. legal defense funds for victims of police misconduct, community programs for at-risk youth, scholarships for minority students pursuing law degrees, support services for families affected by police violence. I want to split the money, Evelyn explained. Keep enough to fix my home and make sure my grandkids can go to college, but the rest needs to work for change. Patricia reviewed the list, impressed by the thought and detail Evelyn had put into it. This could help a lot of people, Mrs. Harris. That's the point, isn't it? To make sure what happened to me serves some greater purpose. Over the next few months, Evelyn's vision began to take shape. She established the Cedar Street Justice Initiative, a foundation dedicated to promoting police reform and supporting victims of law enforcement misconduct. The foundation's first office opened in a renovated storefront just down the street from her home. "Why Cedar Street?" a reporter asked at the opening ceremony. Evelyn smiled, standing proud in front of the new building. "Because every street should be like Cedar Street, a place where neighbors look out for each other, where injustice against one is injustice against all." The foundation's work began immediately. They provided emergency housing for families displaced by wrongful raids, funded legal representation for victims of police misconduct, and supported community programs aimed at building bridges between law enforcement and minority neighborhoods. Lieutenant Brooks, now Captain Brooks, became an unexpected ally. He regularly consulted with the foundation, helping to develop training programs focused on eliminating racial bias in policing. "The system won't change unless we admit it needs changing," he told a room full of officers during a foundation-sponsored training session. What happened to Mrs. Harris should never happen again. Evelyn's grandchildren became regular fixtures at the foundation office. Lily, now 8, loved helping to sort donated supplies for families in need. Tommy, at 11, had become passionate about videography, documenting community meetings and events for the foundation's social media channels. "Grandma," Lily asked one afternoon as they arranged care packages, "are you still scared of the police?" Evelyn paused, considering how to answer. "I'm not scared anymore, baby. I'm determined. There's a difference." The foundation's work drew attention from civil rights organizations across the country. Evelyn found herself speaking at rallies and conferences, sharing her story and vision for change. Her quiet strength and dignified determination resonated with audiences everywhere. At one such event in Washington, D.C., she addressed a crowd of thousands. "I stand before you not just as a victim, but as a witness. A witness to what happens when we let fear and bias guide our actions, but also a witness to what's possible when we stand up, speak out, and demand better. My garden was destroyed that morning, but from that destruction, new seeds of justice have grown." Back home, Evelyn's garden had indeed grown back stronger than ever. She'd expanded it, creating a community space where neighborhood children could learn about growing food and tending the earth. The garden became a symbol of resilience, its abundance shared with families affected by similar raids and injustices. One warm evening, as she sat on her porch watching young Marcus teach a group of children how to stake tomato plants, Mrs. Patterson joined her with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Did you ever think," Mrs. Patterson asked, "that morning would lead to all this?" Evelyn accepted the lemonade, smiling as she watched the children work. "You know, when James was alive, he always said everything happens for a reason. I didn't believe him then, especially not that morning when they broke down my door. But now," she gestured toward the garden, where Marcus was patiently showing a little girl how to tie up a drooping tomato plant. Beyond them, the foundation's office bustled with activity. Through the window, she could see Tommy filming an interview with a family recently affected by police misconduct, while Lily arranged donated books on a shelf nearby. Now, I think maybe he was right. Maybe sometimes we have to go through the storm to build something better. The foundation's influence continued to grow. They worked with legislators to draft new policies on police accountability, helped establish civilian oversight committees, and created programs to support community-based policing initiatives. Evelyn's story became a case study in police reform courses at local academies. On the first anniversary of the raid, Cedar Street hosted a community celebration of change. The street was closed to traffic, filled instead with tables of food, music, and displays showcasing the foundation's work. Police officers, including Captain Brooks, mingled with residents, sharing meals and conversations. Evelyn watched it all from her porch, her heart full. Greg sat beside her, both of them taking in the scene before them. "You've done something amazing here, Mama," Greg said softly. "We've done something amazing," she corrected him. "All of us, together." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the street, Evelyn rose to address the gathered crowd. The chatter died down as she stepped to the microphone, her silver hair catching the evening light. "1 year ago, I stood in my ruined home and promised myself that something good would come from that terrible morning. Looking around today, I see that promise fulfilled in ways I never imagined." She gestured to the diverse crowd before her: residents, police officers, activists, and families who'd been helped by the foundation. "We've turned pain into purpose, fear into determination, and anger into action. But our work isn't done. As long as there are doors being broken down unjustly, as long as there are communities living in fear of those sworn to protect them, as long as there are grandmothers being handcuffed in their bathrobes, our work continues." The crowd cheered, and Evelyn felt tears in her eyes as she watched her grandchildren release dozens of butterflies into the evening air, a symbol of transformation and hope. Later that night, after the crowds had gone home and Cedar Street had returned to its usual quiet, Evelyn sat in her garden. The security lights cast a soft glow over her flowers and vegetables, and the new camera system kept its silent watch. But she wasn't thinking about security or surveillance. She was thinking about James and what he would say if he could see all this. She reached out to touch a tomato plant, its fruit heavy and ripe in the evening air. "You were right, old man," she whispered. "Everything does happen for a reason. And sometimes that reason is bigger than we can imagine." A police car drove slowly past her house, a routine patrol. But instead of triggering fear, it reminded Evelyn of how far things had come. The officer behind the wheel waved, and she waved back, both acknowledging the change that had taken root in their community. Inside her house, the walls now held new photos alongside the old. Pictures of foundation events, news clippings about police reform victories, and snapshots of families they'd helped. Among them hung a simple frame containing the first dollar bill donated to the Cedar Street Justice Initiative, alongside a handwritten note that read, "From tragedy comes transformation." As Evelyn finally rose to go inside, she paused at her front door, the same door that had been broken down that terrible morning. Now it stood strong and secure, but it was no longer just an entrance to her home. It had become a symbol of something much larger, a doorway to change, to justice, to hope. She touched the door frame gently, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingers. The security system blinked its quiet reassurance, and through her window, she could see the lights of other homes on Cedar Street, each one a testament to a community that had refused to be broken. "Good night, James," she whispered as she stepped inside. "We did it, honey. We really did it." The door closed softly behind her, its lock clicking with a sound that no longer brought fear, but rather the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the most powerful changes grow from the deepest wounds. On Cedar Street, those changes had taken root and flourished, spreading hope like seeds in the wind, promising a harvest of justice for generations to come. Evelyn's story is a powerful reminder that true resilience isn't just about enduring life's injustices, but about standing strong in the face of fear and reclaiming your dignity, no matter the cost. How would you have felt if you were in Evelyn's shoes, waking up to such a shocking violation in the safety of your own home? Have you ever faced a situation where you had to fight for what was right, even when no one seemed to be listening? Let us know in the comments below. And if Evelyn's journey moved you, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more inspiring and emotional stories like this one.